Have you ever thought about it? What could be the connection between the technology we use every day, which has become a part of our lives, and a war happening thousands of kilometers away? It sounds very far-fetched, but it's really not. Today, we're going to take a look at exactly this invisible connection, this fragile chain. We will conduct a thought experiment on how a conflict that starts in the Gulf could suddenly bring the world of artificial intelligence to a standstill, or even plunge it into a winter that could last for years. Let's go back to where it all began, to those hot waters where the oil tankers are, and together see how we reach the very heart of the digital world from there. Everything begins in March 2026 with the spark of that critical incident. One of the world's lifelines, the Strait of Hormuz, suddenly goes up in flames and is closed to ship traffic. And this is exactly where our story begins. It starts at the very moment the Gulf is set ablaze. The International Energy Agency, in other words, the most authoritative voice on the subject, calls the situation the biggest global energy security crisis in history. This doesn't just mean that prices will go up a little, it means we've never seen anything like this before. We're talking about a moment when the rules of the game are literally being rewritten, perhaps even the end of an era. And of course, the first blow hits our wallets directly. The moment the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the price of a barrel of Brent crude oil exceeds $120. Do you know what this means? Almost one-fifth of global liquefied natural gas trade is suddenly stranded, and this shockwave immediately starts to shake the entire global economy. But wait, the story isn't just about prices at the pump. The real issue is just beginning now. Because this energy crisis very quickly turns into a massive crisis for the hardware industry that produces the brains of artificial intelligence, those advanced chips. This is exactly where that invisible connection comes into play. Now we have an element in front of us called helium. Maybe you know it from party balloons, but in reality, it's the hidden hero of technology. It's indispensable for producing the most advanced chips. There is no alternative. In other words, if there's no helium, there are no advanced artificial intelligence chips either. The equation is that simple and just as frightening. Look, one-third of the world's total helium, a massive portion, comes from Qatar, and this helium is distributed to the world through the Strait of Hormuz, which is now closed. So this is a perfect storm scenario. Suddenly, a quarter of the world's helium supply evaporates. Experts say it would take at least 6 months for this supply chain to recover. But that's not all. Another element vital for chips is bromine. Two-thirds of it also comes from Israel and Jordan in that region. What we're witnessing is essentially a supply chain collapse. So what happens when this hardware and energy shock come together? The dominoes start to fall one by one. The crisis spreads through the global economy like a pandemic. That massive economic bubble inflated around artificial intelligence is now facing the risk of bursting. In fact, there were those who saw this danger coming. The global economy was already fragile. In this crisis, that was the needle prick that burst the bubble. Look, the picture is crystal clear. What was everyone talking about before the war? AI investments, new data center constructions. These were the engines of growth. There was an overwhelming optimism in the markets. So what happened with the onset of the war? Everyone started talking about global recession and stagflation. That optimism was replaced by massive volatility, by fear. In short, everything was turned upside down overnight. Suddenly, the possibility emerged that artificial intelligence, once the engine of growth, could become a burden on the economy. Well, of course, the markets didn't take long to react either. Stock markets plummeted. So does this situation mean a new AI winter for artificial intelligence? In other words, is that major slowdown, that period of stagnation, just around the corner? What we call the AI winter has happened before in history. It's a period of disappointment that follows great expectations and exaggerated promises. Investments stop, research slows down, and interest wanes. It's a freezing period when everyone withdraws to the sidelines. But this time things might be different. Because this time, it's not just the money and interest, but the very physical foundations that make artificial intelligence possible, in other words, the hardware itself, that are being shaken. So how does the road to this slowdown work? Let's take a look step by step. First, the energy crisis. Artificial intelligence consumes 3 to 5 times more electricity than a normal data center. And when electricity prices skyrocket, these costs become unsustainable. Second, hardware shortages. There's no helium, and other materials are also lacking. This disrupts chip production. It sends prices through the roof. Third, a cost explosion. Now, the total cost of setting up an artificial intelligence infrastructure is rising so much that it is becoming impossible for many companies. And the result is the fourth step. Investments are being withdrawn. Faced with these massive costs and economic stagnation, companies are either postponing or completely canceling their AI projects. This is not just a theory, this is a domino effect. All right, we've seen the big picture. But what will be the impact of this entire global crisis on our daily lives, on the apps we use, and on the AI services we rely on at work? So let's also take a look at how this situation affects you and me, in other words, the end users. With rising energy and hardware costs, companies are left with very few options. They will pass this burden on to us through higher subscription fees and usage charges. Free usage may even be eliminated entirely. In short, the era of cheap and abundant artificial intelligence may be slowly coming to an end because of skyrocketing basic costs. Perhaps this crisis will force us to develop smarter, more efficient algorithms that consume less energy and will open the doors to a brand new era in artificial intelligence, the era of efficiency. The use of open source models that do not require internet access will rapidly increase. Corporate structures and IT architects will need to focus on hybrid systems in order to provide efficient and uninterrupted service in terms of energy usage. Thank you for listening to Fatih's Digital Twin. I would be very happy if you also share your thoughts in the comments.